This is Brother Ron, and welcome to We All Be News Radio and TV, the news-free Dixie for the 21st century.
Cliff Black over here, Dr. Black.
Yes, sir.
I heard he's not from Memphis. He's from Chicago.
All right.
As I understand it, got to Memphis in the 1980s. So we might get a little impression here from the outside looking in, because all of our other panelists over these last few weeks have been from Memphis. And I understand Dr. Black teaches history and some continuing education classes. Okay, I can't pronounce that word right there. So I'm going to let you kind of explain who you are and then give a few impressions from being not in Memphis about the 1960s and 60s. Then we'll open it up for question and answers, and hopefully Judge Brown will be here by that time. Just hold that close to you.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, and a lot of the problems that people were suffering in other places, they were not necessarily in Chicago in the same way. And Chicago was probably the most segregated city on the face of the planet. But there's some things that happen that most people don't really know about. Now, I don't know about y'all, but me personally, I was one of those young people who would use like a lab mice, white mouse, like, you know, the little rats in the laptop. And they used me for an integration experiment. Now, I don't know how many of you wound up getting used for integration. So I don't know how many of you wound up going to one of these schools where you got spit on, or where you actually wound up in resource classes because of your complexion. But those are the things that happened. The reason that I'm here right now tonight, because someone asked a question last week, and the question was integration a good thing or a bad thing? Bishop E. Brown tried to address it, and Judge Brown tried to address it. But me personally, I don't think that I heard anyone address the question. Now, I've heard the question quite a number of times. Was integration a good thing or a bad thing? And I keep thinking that we're refusing to talk about it. We are refusing to actually discuss integration. We're refusing to discuss what you call race. We are refusing to discuss these things, even though I hear them all over the TV. I hear everybody talking at this, but very seldom I hear anybody talking about it. I've heard no one talk about where race comes from, how it came into existence, who created it, why was it created, why do you think it's a reality when it's not? The question that was asked was integration a good thing or a bad thing? Are there any white people in here? Would you raise your hand? There are some white people.
They're Canadian, they're not white.
There are some white people in here. Okay, no problem. No, it's not a good question. I'm serious. And at the same time, if you're a black person, raise your hand. So you got some black people and you got some white people. Well, you see that question about immigration, I think it has to be asked from these different groups of people if they are part of these different groups. In other words, the group of so-called black people may have a different opinion about immigration. If there's a group of so-called white people, they may have a different opinion about immigration. But I'll bet you a dime to a dollar that whatever you give me is going to be your opinion. Right. And I bet you I know what an opinion is. Now, I don't know about you, but I study words, and I try to get all the children to study language, especially the English language and how words come into existence. It's called etymology. It is the study of the word. It's very important. And once you understand the language, you can understand what's going on. A lot of us, we don't really know anything about this thing called immigration. Where did it come from? How did it get started? When did it start? What was this whole thing about the so-called Civil War? Was it the Civil War? I mean, we go to school and they teach us about the Civil War in school, right? Is that right? I ask children all the time when the Civil War started. They don't have a clue. When did it end? They don't have a clue. I think it was actually the War of Rebellion. I think if you look it up and you actually look the record up, it's not listed as the Civil War. It's listed as the War of Rebellion. I didn't think the American Revolution is listed as the American Revolution in England. It's listed as the insurrection of the British North American colonies. In other words, there's something going on right now that we're not addressing. If the question was asked, did integration work? When did it start? What was the objective? Who created it? What did they want from it? Did any of you get what was supposed to be gotten from the enterprise or from this engagement, this activity of integration? So I'm asking the question that was asked last week. If you benefited from integration, raise your hand. You did. Oh, you did. Well, how did you benefit?
Let's ask her.
Well, the reason I'm asking the question is because I really don't think we've ever truly addressed any of this with each other. What we do is we let the news address it. We let somebody on TV tell us what to think about these things. We're not addressing any of these situations for ourselves. I've watched you try, do your best to come up with the thoughts from the community, and you're trying to figure out a way to use the newer technologies and medium to actually put it out there and project it. Well, you're doing the best you can, but you're fighting against odds that you've got a problem with. So now let's ask you, did integration help you?
I would say no.
Why would you say no?
Because I lack access to resources that can really make my life, quality of life better.
Okay, well, where would those resources have come from for you before immigration?
That's a good point. From the, let me see.
So you don't really know, do you?
The cotton fields.
Cotton fields?
Yes, sir.
No, wait, we'll slow down. Before integration, there were people in Memphis, Tennessee, because there was a Black Wall Street in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
There was a family. The family named their child Antonio Maceo. You see, Antonio Maceo is out of Cuba. But the family named their child Antonio Maceo. The reason they named him Maceo is because they didn't know how to pronounce the vowels correctly. You see, the vowel is ah, not a. So because we don't know how to pronounce the vowels correctly, we say Du Bois. We don't say Dubois. But his name was Dubois.
Right.
See, her sister, your cousin, her name is Mercedes. But that's only because we didn't know that we were supposed to be saying Mercedes. Are you understanding what I'm saying?
That's right.
Well, see, in Memphis, there was a young man, his name was, I think it was Willis. What was Willis's first name? No, not Withers. Willis.
A.W.? Yeah.
A.W. Willis.
Right.
And he created what? Supreme Mortgage. You see, that's where your financing came from.
Mm-hmm.
It came from people like the Walker family. And it came from people that had enough sense to build their own hospitals, to build their own schools so they could train their children to be dentists and to be doctors.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it came from. So, see, when they had this situation under what you call Jim Crow, it made them do something. They built an infrastructure. And believe it or not, this city, and where I come from, in Chicago, it was called Brownsville.
Right.
There was a real infrastructure in place. In New York, Harlem, and Brooklyn, and Wheatfield came into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Black Wall Street was not Oklahoma. It was in, was it Durham, North Carolina?
Wilmington.
No, Durham.
Oh.
It's where Spalding Insurance Company was. In Atlanta, you had Herndon, the insurance company on the corner that he built. Look, there was plenty of financing from people. I think Gaston over in Alabama, Fuller in Chicago, Debbie Clement Stone. And here's what's really strange about Debbie Clement Stone. They just found out that he was colored. They just found out that he was colored. Didn't nobody know he was colored. All that time, you see his mother had a complexion like my wife. But his mother actually would come to the home. They lived over the, what do you call it, Jeff? On the south. No, going toward the lake. They had a big mansion over there. And she would come home in her maid's outfit. That was his mother. His mother's the one that showed Debbie Clement Stone how to start the insurance company.
Wow.
That's how he did it. Stone is the one who actually caused, where she comes from, in Mount Bayou, there was another Black Wall Street. Now understand, we don't know anything about Mount Bayou. And our children are not being taught about A.W. Willis, or A.M.C. Walker, or Gaston, or Fuller. And understand something now, before integration, when you were forced to build your own, your children were learning about these people. And they were learning what these people had done. He was talking about, he got out of the Air Force and became the police and then started a security company. The next thing you know, he's the ADT man. Well, what he did tell you is I think the person that handled one of his deals getting out of the business when he retired, wasn't his name Mabry? Holyfield?
Oh.
And Banks and them? Well, here's the thing. See, you said that you couldn't get financed. Well, this is a funny thing. Frank and them learned from a guy named Father McKnight. Father McKnight was the one that not only trained them here, but was the brother in Greenville, Mississippi, out of New Jersey.
Charles.
He started what was called MACE.
Okay.
And understand, these efforts were happening all over the country. Leon Sullivan in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we can go city by city, state by state. You see, you were forced to do something for yourselves. Now integration came along, and now all of a sudden, your children wind up in the resource class. I can't figure that one out. So what I'm getting at is, why all of a sudden do your children not learn how to read?
Wow.
In other words, before integration, your children were learning how to read. Now all of a sudden, the school superintendent is saying that there's a problem with your children learning how to read because you're impoverished people and you make less than $40,000 a year. So your children can't learn to read. Absolute nonsense.
Wow.
So what I'm getting at is to answer the question, to address the question.
Right.
If I'm not wrong, before integration, I think there was a guy around the corner on Hernando. Wasn't his name Clifford Miller? Wasn't his name Clifford Miller? Had a club called the Flamingo? There was another one around the corner at a club called Club Handy.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, when they made the deal on Beale Street, they told them that they would receive their fair share of whatever went down having to do with contracts.
Right.
So before integration, you had an infrastructure.
Mm.
After integration, someone else is calling shots and teaching your children. Someone else is calling shots and is in control of you politically. Before integration, you were struggling to be in control of yourself politically. Now, I'm also suggesting this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm calling everybody, so-called white people
Right.
and so-called black people, because y'all all two different sides of the same coin. You're not different people. You are the same exact people. You just got two different styles. You don't have different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
You came up in the United States of America. This is weird. After integration, you don't even know the inception date of the country. Come on, y'all. Somebody tell me. When did this country come into existence? Give me a year. Come on, somebody tell me.
1789.
That's only because you've been in my class. Everybody else was in 1776.
Yeah.
The thing is, what we have to do is we have to go back to that time before integration so we can make some agreements with each other. And we can go into this from the beginning with agreements. We can actually negotiate this correctly because we don't know what the people were doing that did it. And after it was all over with, they didn't know either. How many of you were debriefed? There are some of you in here as old as I am and maybe a little older. Have you ever been debriefed? Come on, y'all. You've never been debriefed.
I don't know what you mean by debriefed.
Well, anytime you're in a situation, a traumatic situation, a social situation, social, economic, political, and it creates havoc in your communities, shouldn't you actually sit down and analyze what has taken place? Shouldn't you analyze how you feel about being beaten up in the bathroom? Shouldn't you analyze how you feel about having to protect yourself going to and coming from school? Shouldn't you actually ask questions of yourself about how you feel about everything that has happened? So far, people have just been telling us how to feel. I don't think that we can continue to do that. At some point, we've got to all honestly talk to each other about how we really feel about this. That will be when we finally decide to integrate. In other words, when you actually decide for yourself, not because of a law, not because the government said you had to do it, but because you want to do it, when you decide. Now we're making progress. How are you going to come up with a new system? You say you can't get financing to do anything.
Right.
Well, where are you going to get it from? How hard was it for you to negotiate a basic business deal? It was pretty rough, wasn't it? You spent years manipulating that. And the only reason he pulled it off, I think, is just an opinion. Y'all were smarter. Y'all were smarter than the folks you went up against. Somebody actually provided you with a plan, with a program, and you went step by step, and you pulled it off. Well, that's what everybody's got to do. That's what you've got to do. We cannot blame what happened for our present situation. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Any questions?
No, it's fine.
Any questions? Please. Dr. Mr. Chisholm, I know you got something to expound upon here.
I'm just getting educated.
Well, I see the judge coming in right now.
Oh, the Battle of Titans are here.
Say that, hold on, Ron. Say it again, sir. We didn't hear you.
They say
Say it again.
Say, repeat your question.
I said your panelists got far more knowledge about what took place during their lifetime and during their struggle. So I'm learning things myself since I've been here. But the struggle that we've gone through as a people is to feel that they're not over with. We still struggle. We're still trying to get there. Ultimately, in the confines of our life and living, if we don't get there, our kids will. But in my lifetime, my prayer to my God is, before I leave here, you let me be able to see a world that don't see race, don't see discrimination, don't see black, and don't see white. That's my prayer. But I know that I will probably never witness that, but my granddaughter will. And that's what I'm looking for.
Amazing.
You say you were traumatized. I mean, you were an integration experiment.
Well, I was sent to foster homes because of the problems that were going on with people. Then I went into a boys' home in Chicago. They integrated the boys' home. I was one of the young people that they used to integrate it on the north side of Chicago. So I wound up graduating from a school that you would call a white school. I wound up being in an institution that you would call a white institution. But that integration experiment in Chicago was no different than the one that was going on here. And this was just an experiment. No one knew where it was going. No one planned it. They just put a bunch of children out there on the street and hoped for the best. And I understand that everybody figured they knew what they were doing, but they didn't. No one did. Now you've got to make this work at this point. And I know it's late in the day, but the only way you can make it work is y'all ever talk about it.
And you talked a minute ago about people needing to be debriefed because they were traumatized. And I heard from one of the Memphis 13 that integrated, one of the ones that integrated the school system here. And she talked about the fact, to me personally, how traumatized she was, and she's just now really able to talk about what happened to her in those days when she went to the elementary school here in Memphis, Tennessee, as one of two black children in that school. So I'm asking, you talked about the community needing to be debriefed. All of us need to be debriefed, and it has never happened. And do you have any recommendations as to how we can do that?
The only thing that I know personally is all these children have to learn how to read. The only way out of this is that we have to read and read well. And if we do not read, this does not end. He just said, I think I just heard Brother Chisholm say, he wants to see the end of race and racism well, you know, it'd be a nice thing that folks would call themselves black people and white people. Why do you call yourselves that? Why do you identify yourself with a color? I mean, that's crazy. Yet at the same time, we won't address this thing. We won't talk about it. Matter of fact, just as I know we gotta go. All right. Who is the person that actually designated this Caucasian, Negroid, what's the other one? Mongoloid. Who did that? Where did it come from? What year did it happen? In other words, who created race? Why was it created? And why do you think it's a reality?
Thank you so much.
Excellent.